Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. My name is Stephanie Soebbing, and today I'm going to teach you a new free motion quilting design using full line stencils as your guide. I love learning new designs using stencils because you can use them until you develop the muscle memory to be able to do them on your own. Today I'm going to be using the stencil number 3602. And it was designed in 2008 by Patty Clayton, and it is a fabulous design because it has this great all over swirl that you can follow, and so it's not that hard, but it is a little bit larger scale design, so that way you can fill your quilt a little bit faster, but it is still pretty densely quilted, which I personally like. So when we quilt this, we're going to quilt to the point and then pause, and then go to the next point and pause, and then just keep following along, pausing at those points. And your pauses are going to get slower and slower the more you get the hang of it, but that's a great spot to, if you have to come to a full stop, to adjust your hands so that way you can move to get to different parts of it. That is a great time to do that. So I'm going to show you how to do this. The tools you need are obviously a stencil, and this is a really cool stencil. So this is essentially the similar to what you would use if you were screen printing a t-shirt. So these lines in here are mesh, and so you're going to use a quilt pounce, and I'm using pink today because it's going to show up really well on this little seafoamy blue background I have. And it has a chalk powder, so when I swipe it over the top, it's going to go through those mesh lines. So I'm going to have the full line to, hence the name full line stencil, I'm going to have the full line to trace, as opposed to some of the plastic ones you get where there's like dotted lines, and sometimes it's hard to figure out where you're supposed to go next. You can use the quilt pounce with those dotted ones if you have a stash of them, but they really work best with the stencils. They're made by the same company, Hancy Creations. Obviously you need some thread. I like to quilt with RFL 50 weight when I'm working on my home sewing machine, and I really like using Machiner's quilting gloves. They've got little grippies on the fingertips, and that helps me hold and move the fabric a little bit easier. All right, so I've shown how to prime your Pounce Pad in a couple of other videos, so we'll link those down below in the video description. But basically what you're gonna do is this top comes off like a kid's pink, and you're going to take the chalk powder that came with it, and you're going to fill it all the way up to the top. So you're gonna bang this really hard 50 times against a hard surface when you're using it for the first time. And that's going to start to saturate your white Pounce Pad with whatever color chalk you're using. And then you're gonna repeat the process 50 more times when you're filling it for the first time. Anytime you refill it, you just have to do it the 50 times. And when I know the folks who go and demo, one pack of this will last them an entire show. So like if they're going down to Houston, one pack of this, and they can demo all day, every day for like 4 days straight. So you can do a lot of quilts with just this little bit of chalk. We have Pounce Pads and the refill chalk in pink, blue, and white over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We also have lots of thread, the stencils, and the Machiner's quilting gloves. So check those all out and get these. What I've done is I've cut about a fat quarter size of fabric and made a sandwich with that. And that's a really good size to practice with. So if you're trying a new design out for the first time, try it out on that first. That's enough for you to kind of get the hang of it before you try it on the real thing. Plus, if you do like a fat quarter a day, then you're going to get a lot better, a lot faster at free motion quilting. All right, so let's get started. All right, so I already mentioned this. I'm using pink today because it contrasts nicely with this blue. You want to pick something that you're going to be able to see. I could have also used the ultimate white, which irons off. Both the pink and the blue have pigment in them, so you don't want to iron them, but they brush easily off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this down, and I'm going to line this registration mark. It kind of looks like a little bit of a target up at the top, and then I just have the edge lined up with the edge of my fat quarter. And then it's called a Pounce Pad, so it's really tempting to like bang it, but you don't want to do that. What you want to do is swipe it across your design. I usually will do that a couple times, just to ensure that it transfers. And I hold it in place with my fingertips at the bottom. There is a little bit of shift, so you might get a little bit of double vision lines, but for the most part, it works really well. So before I remove this, I wanna make sure that it transferred well. So I lift it up and give it a little peek, and I can see it really well. Let me check this other corner, and I can see that well too. Okay, so now here's where these registration marks come in handy. because what I want to do is use them to line up. So you can see real clearly this registration mark right here. So I want to get this registration mark right on top of that one. So if you just kind of put your finger in the center of that target, you can line it up and get it mostly on top. And again, I'm just going to keep it nice and straight, and even with the edge, you could use your piecing as a guide for that. And then we're going to swipe again, holding it in place with your fingertips. All right, so now when I remove that, you can see that the line matches right up to where that finished. So I'm going to keep marking just my first row for this one, because this one is a little different. It kind of fits in the wedge, but we'll do that in a second. I'll show you that works. In the meantime, I'm going to mark one more time just to get this entire row done. Then we're going to start quilting. So I've done a couple of things to my sewing machine to get it ready. First of all, I put on my free motion quilting foot. This is also called a darning foot. If your machine didn't come with one, you can order a universal one. We also have those at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. I also lowered my feed dogs. If your machine won't do that, you can just decrease your stitch length down to 0, and that'll work as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this on, and normally I quilt whatever fits in between my hands. Now I'm going to be holding my hands a little bit differently so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to have my hands more staggered like this, so that way you can see what's going on from the left. But normally I hold them just like this on the sides of the design, and whatever fits in between my hands is what I quilt. If I can't fit it in there, I pause with my needle down, and then I move my hands and move to the next part. So that's another thing. If your machine has a setting where it can stop with the needle down, make sure you engage that. I also like to turn my sewing speed down to the middle speed. That way I can put my pedal to the metal, my foot all the way down, but I'm not going to be going too fast to where my stitches get super tiny, or I feel like I have to speed like crazy and then I ended up with too big of stitches. Because when you do free motion quilting on your home sewing machine, you are the stitch regulator. So you have to determine the length of your stitches by how fast you're moving in relation to the speed of your sewing machine. So it takes a little bit of time to kind of find that sweet spot, and I even need to take a little bit of time every time I start doing it for the first time in any sewing session. One other thing I'm doing here is I'm making sure I am draping the quilt so that it is not scraping against my body where that chalk is, because I had someone come in once, they couldn't figure out why the chalk was rubbing off, and they were scraping it against their chest as it was coming up. And so they were losing all the chalk, and it was all over their body, which you don't want to have happen. So make sure the quilt is nice and draped and it's not dragging and it's just in your lap. All right, so I'm going to put my needle down and back up again. And then I'm going to pull on that thread to pull the bobbin thread to the top. So I've got my bobbin thread pulled to the top. That will help keep it from getting all gobbly and nesty on the bottom, which you don't want. And then I'm going to stitch in place a couple of times, and that will help secure my thread. Some of the newer machines have a secure thread button where you can just press it and it will do that for it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just stitch to this first point, and then I'm going to pause just so I can sort of get used to this as it's working. I am positioning one hand to the left of it, and I'm being very careful not to drag it across, because I will wipe all the chalk off if I do that. I just want to very gently lay it on top and leave it in place. So now I've stopped where that point is. This gives me a minute to kind of reevaluate, move my hands if I need to, and see that I'm now going to be going around to hit to the tip over here. Sometimes for me, going backward on your domestic sewing machine is harder because I can't always see where I'm going. So if you aren't exactly on the line, don't worry too much about it, because the line is going to go away. As long as you kind of follow the idea of the line, the design is still going to hold through. All right, so I've quilted down. Now I need to go around to the loop and get to the next little bit there. And again, I can't see everything of where I'm going, so I'm just kind of following a little bit here. All right, so now rather than coming to a full stop, I'm just gonna kind of pause and stitch in place for a stitch or two, and then change directions. And when you quilt like that, it helps you to have really nice peaks when you come to a tip of a swirl. So if your swirls are not having those pointy tips, then it means that you are changing directions too fast and you need to slow down when you get to those points. All right, so I'm just gonna keep following along there. Again, normally I would be holding my hands like this, but I'm holding them like this so you can kind of see what I'm doing. But you definitely have better control if you hold your hands like this. I'm just gonna quick finish stitching this and you guys can kind of watch as I do it. But the best way to conquer this is to actually get one of your own and try it on some fat quarters and master the stitch on your own. All right, so I finished quilting the first row and it's not perfect. You can tell in this space, I really followed the idea of the curve, but it is definitely far from being on the line. But here's the cool part. All I have to do is wipe this off and it is totally gone and you can't see where the line was to start with. So that is pretty awesome. Wipe it off up there too. All right, so here's a really fun part about this stencil. So it is meant to sort of nest in there. So you can see that the design kind of comes out and then curves in. So this part here tucks right into this divot there. So what you can do is you can snug that up in there. And again, you just kind of want to hold it back and sort of pull it out and make sure that you are close, but just far enough away to be able to get that look. And what it does is it really makes your quilting very dense. You could always line it up exactly with the way it is, but then it's going to be more obvious when you make mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect because you're not a machine, and that's okay. That's why we make handmade things and have joy in that. So I've got that snugged up in there. It's going to create a lot of texture, going to hide your mistakes. So now I'm going to go ahead and mark that. Give it a little peek, see if it transferred well. Got a little bit of double vision. That stencil shifted a little bit on me as I was doing that, but that's okay. So now what I would want to do is mark this part, so that way I'm quilting all the way off to the edge. So I'm going to line up that registration mark and then also check over here, make sure I'm not going to be covering any of the lines that I've already quilted. And then I'm just going to real quickly mark this little bit. That way my quilting can go right off the edge of my little sample. And you can see everything matches up real nicely and the quilting goes all the way off, which is what I wanted. And then we're going to keep on going down the line. All right, so I finished marking this entire second row, and this is exactly how I would mark it if I had a larger piece too. You want to do one row at a time because then the chalk is going to stay on long enough for you to quilt it. And if you did more than that, then you're just going to have to remark all the time because the chalk is going to keep rubbing off as you work. So now I'm going to get started, and I'm going to start quilting probably right here because I do have like little peaks here that are coming in, but in a real quilt, like you wouldn't necessarily see that. It would go right up to the edge. So I'm going to just pick up right here and quilt in and then start going around all those curves again. All right, I've stopped, come to a full stop because I need to reposition my hands. I no longer have enough control. So I always try to do that at a point because then it's easier to change directions without impacting the design, where you have a nice smooth curve until you can tell you stopped and then you were all wonky when you came out of it. So I was playing bobbin chicken and I ran out of bobbin. I thought I could finish the sample with the one I had in. But it's a great opportunity for you to show you how to fix it if this happens to you, because obviously if you're doing a whole quilt, you're gonna go through a couple bobbins. So what I'm doing is I'm going back to the point and I'm going to put my needle down and back up again right in the point of where I last stopped. Now I'm gonna pull the bobbin thread up again. And I still have a couple of threads here from where I ran out. So what I do, and it works for me, might not work for everybody, but what I do is I will stitch one there and then I'll go back up a little bit. And then I'll take a couple of teeny tiny stitches and then I just start going. I don't tie off the last thread, I just sew over it a lot. And that for me tends to hold everything in place and I'm okay. Now, if you were going to do this for a show quilt, you would want to tie everything off and hide the knot and everything, but this is a sample piece and the majority of what we make is not going to be entered into a grand show where we could win prize money. It's just for us and for our enjoyment and for our family members. So as long as it holds up, you're good. So again, you can see faint hints of where the lines were, and I wasn't always right on them when I did my stitching, but it doesn't matter because all we have to do is swipe it away and no one will ever know that we weren't perfect. If you want to be perfect, go spend a minimum of 20 grand, get a long arm with a computerized system and you can be perfect. But if you just want to learn how to finish your own quilts on your home sewing machine, these stencils are a great way to go. This is a really great skill building stencil because you can work on creating smooth curves and sharp points all in one and build that skill level. And once you get that muscle memory down, you can work on trying it on a fat quarter where you're not using the stencil. But so much of quilting, people say, oh, just do a swoop with a nice little point at the end. And that is easy for someone who's been doing it for a long time. It's not easy when you're first getting started and you're not quite sure where to go. So that's where these stencils can really be helpful because we have those lines to follow and then the chalk stays on as long as we need it and then it goes away when you're done. Thanks so much for following along with this week's tutorial. And once again, I'm Stephanie Soebbing from Quilt Addicts Anonymous. If you want to give this a go, we have everything you need to do it over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We're able to bring these videos for free because when you guys see something you want to do, you get it from us. So that's a great way to support us and help us bring you more video tutorials. If you see something that you're inspired, you want to give it a try, we would love for you to get it from us. Thanks so much, and if you're interested in this, we've got a couple other videos on free motion quilting. I'll link those in the video description down below so you can check them out. And until next time, happy quilting.